The story begins in Okhtyrka, a city scarred by the early days of the Russian invasion and still shaken by each new strike. Before dawn, residents were pulled from the ruins of an apartment building, the night sky lit only by the flames of a drone attack that tore through the Sumy region. Fire crews moved with urgency, carrying people down fractured stairwells and into the cold morning air. These scenes of destruction have become familiar, yet each one reshapes the national mood, sharpening the pressure on Ukraine's leadership as pivotal negotiations unfold far from the front line. Against this backdrop, Volodymyr Zelensky speaks with an unusual blend of restraint and gravity. His words carry the weight of a political moment that could redefine the trajectory of the war. The Ukrainian president confirms that the United States is proposing something unprecedented: a withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from the territories Kyiv still controls in eastern Donetsk, to create what Washington is calling a free and demilitarized economic zone. For a nation that has fought fiercely to recover land and protect sovereignty, even uttering such a proposal ignites tension. Zelensky stresses that the discussions are ongoing and that nothing is agreed to without public consent. But he acknowledges that Washington's push is real, saying, "We had a conversation with a team from the United States about possible security guarantees for Ukraine, and we are working on a document that needs to be robust enough to actually work. We believe it should be approved by the United States Congress. This would mean real, solid, and legally binding security guarantees for our country, and they need to be implemented. It is a statement crafted to soothe allies, signal resolve, and calm a domestic audience that fears any hint of territorial concession." Kyiv insists that any change to the nation's borders must go before the people, either through elections or a referendum. That insistence is not just political, it echoes a national trauma. Tens of thousands dead, cities shattered, families displaced, and communities divided since Russia launched its invasion in February 2022. The concept of a so-called free economic zone raises immediate questions. Would this strip of land become a neutral buffer? A Russian-influenced corridor under a new name? A testing ground for US-brokered reconstruction? Or simply a pause mechanism disguised as long-term policy? Critics in Kyiv warn that Moscow could exploit such a zone while consolidating military advantages elsewhere. Others argue that without binding guarantees from Washington, Europe, and NATO, any demilitarized zone risks becoming a gateway to further aggression. Zelensky frames the moment not as capitulation, but as responsibility, reminding that Europe and the United States share the burden of shaping peace. "America is taking serious steps to end the war one way or another," he says. "And our task, and I am sure that it is our common task of everyone in Europe, is to really end the war, and not just get a pause in the fighting. A decent peace is needed for this to really happen. Everyone must be on the side of peace." Those remarks follow intense diplomatic movement in European capitals. In London, cameras capture Zelensky, standing alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and French President Emmanuel Macron. The four leaders shake hands outside 10 Downing Street, a moment meant to symbolise unity, even as Europe privately disputes Washington's approach. Some leaders worry the US plan rewards Russian advances. Others fear rejecting it outright risks alienating a future Trump administration determined to cut military spending and push for rapid negotiation. Inside those rooms, the conversation is direct. European officials caution against any framework that forces Ukraine into a defensive retreat without ironclad commitments. Zelensky reinforces that message publicly, saying that unity between Europe, Ukraine, and the United States is essential, and that there are things which we can't manage without the Americans, things which we can't manage without Europe. In Washington, Donald Trump addresses reporters in a series of roundtable meetings at the White House. Although he avoids laying out detailed terms, US officials hint at a strategic shift: fewer troops abroad, fewer open-ended military commitments, and an emphasis on negotiated zones, economic reconstruction, and limited security arrangements backed by congressional approval rather than sweeping treaty promises. For Ukraine, whose survival relies on weapons, financial support, and diplomatic cover from the United States, these signals create a difficult dilemma: accept a deal shaped by US domestic politics, or risk losing the backing of a partner whose priorities are rapidly changing. Zelensky's tone reveals the stakes. He describes the framework being discussed, a document that must be strong enough to endure and must receive Congress's approval. He emphasises words like legally binding, real, and solid, signalling to Ukrainians that he will not accept vague assurances. He knows that any agreement lacking enforcement mechanisms could crumble under pressure from Moscow. The push for a demilitarized economic zone in eastern Donetsk is part of the broader American proposal for a step-by-step ceasefire arrangement. US negotiators describe it as a pragmatic pathway to halt fighting, restore stability, and later reopen political discussions regarding long-term territorial resolution. But Ukrainian officials counter-argue that a ceasefire based on withdrawal may freeze the conflict at unfavourable lines, allowing Russia to regroup. Yet as these global conversations unfold, the reality inside Ukraine continues to intrude. The footage from Okhtyrka, the fire tearing through apartments, the brave steadiness of emergency crews navigating collapsing halls, reminds viewers that war has not slowed, and civilians continue to pay the heaviest price. Each strike undermines optimism about diplomatic breakthroughs. Each burned building deepens the urgency for a sustainable and enforceable agreement. When Zelensky speaks again in Dublin days earlier, he repeats his message with almost the same wording. It is rare for a leader to echo the same phrasing so precisely, but it signals a carefully coordinated effort to establish clarity. That peace must be meaningful, that Europe must remain on the same page, and that the United States must remain engaged. He warns against illusions of short-term calm, saying that a dignified peace, not just a pause, is needed. Behind the controlled language is a fear shared widely within Ukraine. That global fatigue, shifts in US priorities, and Russian persistence could leave Ukraine vulnerable. Inside Kiev, Zelensky's team works to interpret Washington's intentions. The proposal of a free economic zone is described as an attempt to convert contested territory into a neutral commercial corridor. Supporters of the concept say that economic incentives could reduce incentives for conflict. Skeptics warn that economic zones can become fronts for influence rather than engines for peace. As Ukrainian officials examine the details, they consider what such a zone would look like in practice. Who would oversee it? Would local residents return? Would reconstruction begin immediately? Would Russian-backed forces remain nearby? Would Ukraine retain administrative authority? Would international observers monitor compliance? Would investors come? Or would it become another grey zone, neither fully safe nor fully sovereign? While these questions swirl, the firefight in Okhtyrka continues in the background of national consciousness. Emergency workers guide elderly residents away from smouldering entryways. Flames lash out from broken windows as firefighters spray water across the damaged building. The camera follows responders as they navigate shifting debris. These scenes contrast sharply with the polished diplomatic images from London and Washington, reminding everyone that while leaders negotiate frameworks, ordinary Ukrainians confront danger daily. As the day progresses, Zelensky expands on his earlier remarks. He speaks of unity between Europe, Ukraine, and the United States, stressing that no single partner can carry the burden alone. The tone conveys both gratitude and quiet warning. He knows that Europe fears a long war and that Washington, under Trump's leadership, is determined to redefine its global footprint. He also knows that Ukraine's position depends on navigating these shifting priorities without appearing weak or resistant to compromise. Behind closed doors, European officials debate how far Ukraine can go in considering territorial withdrawal. Macron urges caution, but acknowledges Washington's leverage. Chancellor Merz emphasises that any framework must protect European security interests. Prime Minister Starmer stresses that public support in Europe depends on demonstrating progress toward de-escalation. Each European leader recognises that the US proposal, whether accepted or rejected, will shape policy far beyond Ukraine. Meanwhile, in Kiev, the damage from the front line extends to local economies and infrastructure. The idea of a free economic zone raises hopes among some business leaders who imagine a region rebuilt with international investment. But these are visions for a distant future. Today, the priority remains survival, stability, and clarity about the path forward. Zelensky's remarks about congressional approval highlight another layer of complexity. Negotiations must align not only with Ukraine and Europe, but with the political landscape in Washington. A divided Congress, shifting priorities, and debates over foreign assistance all shape what guarantees can realistically be codified. He understands well that only a document backed by Congress can outlast changes in US administrations. Without such approval, any agreement might unravel within years, exposing Ukraine to renewed aggression. From Washington, Trump continues addressing reporters in measured tones. His public statements avoid operational specifics, but the broader message is unmistakable. A desire to scale down permanent US military engagements, pursue diplomatic agreements, and place strict conditions on security assistance. For Ukraine, this means that any future support will be shaped by negotiations like the one now underway. Inside Ukraine, civilians watch these global discussions with mixed feelings. Some hope a deal could end the war and save lives. Others fear that compromising on territory sets a precedent that undermines national sovereignty. The emotional weight of this dilemma echoes across towns like Okhtyrka, where families sift through the remains of their homes while listening to Zelensky emphasize peace on international stages. Throughout the day, firefighters and emergency responders continue working under difficult conditions. Smoke rises from the damaged apartment block as water streams down scorched concrete. These images remind viewers across Ukraine and abroad of how fragile life remains along the front line. The juxtaposition between diplomatic discussions and local devastation deepens the pressure on policymakers to make decisions that honour both strategic realities and human suffering. Zelensky's message resonates across interviews and public statements. The United States is taking serious steps to end the war. Europe must remain unified, and Ukraine must secure guarantees that are real and enforceable. He repeats this message not out of rhetorical habit, but because the stakes demand clarity. Peace cannot be symbolic. It must be structural. As diplomats analyse every phrase of the American proposal, the debate expands to include experts, analysts, and former military officials. Some argue that a demilitarized zone could reduce immediate violence. Others insist that Russia could exploit such a corridor without giving up strategic ambitions. Financial analysts examine whether international investors would participate in a zone located on contested ground. Legal scholars debate how authority would be assigned. Security specialists warn of vulnerabilities in enforcement. The broader public sees only fragments of these debates, and what they see often unsettles them. But Zelensky continues to emphasise that no agreement is possible without public backing. He reminds citizens that any territorial question belongs to the nation, not to foreign negotiators. Even as these discussions evolve, the images from 10 Downing Street continue circulating. 4 leaders, united in posture, determined to project stability. Their handshake is meant to symbolise a shared commitment to Ukraine's future, even as each leader navigates domestic pressures that could pull them in different directions. Throughout the day, Zelensky's earlier quotes are repeated in broadcasts across Europe. A decent peace is needed. Everyone should really be on the side of peace. But the interpretation varies. In Paris, commentators debate whether decent peace implies compromise. In Berlin, analysts worry about European security implications. In London, officials emphasise unity. In Kyiv, activists fear that decent peace may become a coded phrase for territorial concessions. By evening, the questions grow sharper. What would a free economic zone mean for Ukrainian families who lived there before the war? Would they return under international supervision? Would local administrations remain Ukrainian? Would Russian influence seep into a demilitarized corridor? And crucially, could such a zone stop the war or merely pause it? Zelensky continues to describe the document being drafted with the United States as a turning point. He emphasizes that it must not be symbolic. It must function as a real security mechanism. He knows that Ukraine's history is filled with broken promises, delayed negotiations, and agreements violated by force. This time, he insists, everything must be different. At the same time, images from Washington show Trump speaking calmly during roundtable discussions. His measured demeanour signals confidence in the plan. For Trump, resolving Ukraine's war on terms favourable to US strategic interests would symbolise a new era in American diplomacy. For Kyiv, it would mean recalibrating expectations for a future where US involvement is conditional and narrowly defined. As the broadcast continues, the viewer returns to Okhtyrka, where night has turned to morning again. Crews continue battling hotspots inside the damaged building. Ash drifts through the air. Families hold blankets around their shoulders as they wait for information. These scenes make clear why any peace agreement must be more than a ceasefire. It must prevent the next drone, the next missile, the next fire. The weight of the moment grows. Zelensky's repeated emphasis on unity and binding guarantees reflects the complexity of negotiating during active conflict. The war is not paused while diplomats write documents. The war continues, reshaping the lives of millions, even as leaders debate demilitarized zones and future economic arrangements. As the hours stretch on, experts observe that the proposal marks a significant shift in US policy. For nearly 3 years, Washington has been the primary source of weapons, financial support, and political backing for Kyiv. Now, facing global pressures, domestic demands, and shifting alliances, the United States is signalling that negotiations, not battlefield dynamics, should define the path ahead. Throughout Europe, leaders recognise this shift and attempt to adapt. In private conversations, some warn Ukraine not to alienate Washington. Others urge Kyiv to resist premature concessions. The conflicting advice reveals the delicate balancing act Zelensky must perform. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military leadership watches the political debate closely. Commanders in the Donetsk region consider the implications of withdrawal. They know that soldiers who fought fiercely for every kilometre may see proposed retreats as betrayal. Yet they also know that international pressure can shape policy regardless of battlefield morale. Analysts note that the United States sees the free economic zone as a stabilising measure, a way to transform contested territory into a commercial buffer. But many inside Ukraine worry about what demilitarization means in practice. Without Ukrainian forces, who would protect residents? Who would oversee the reconstruction? Would the zone be vulnerable to covert infiltration? Could Russia exploit loopholes in enforcement? Would international observers have the authority to intervene? These questions fuel intense debate across Ukrainian media. Commentators dissect every phrase from Washington, every remark from Zelensky, every reaction from European capitals. The gravity of the moment is unmistakable. Through it all, Zelensky insists that unity remains central. He reminds viewers that Ukraine cannot manage certain tasks without American support and cannot manage others without Europe. His message is clear. Peace will require all three actors, the US, Europe, and Ukraine, to coordinate as one. As night falls once more, the smouldering ruins of Okhtyrka linger in the national consciousness. The footage of civilians being evacuated and firefighters battling through collapsed corridors burns into memory. It is these images, not diplomatic handshakes, that define why every decision in negotiation rooms matters so deeply. The broadcast reflects on Zelensky's closing message, that the United States is taking serious steps toward ending the war, and that Ukraine will do everything possible to secure a peace that is real, durable, and just. Yet the path ahead remains uncertain. The proposal for a free economic zone raises hopes for economic rebuilding and fears of territorial compromise. The negotiations underway could shape Ukraine's future for generations. As the final moments unfold, the viewer is left with a portrait of a nation caught between devastation and diplomacy, between immediate suffering and long-term strategy, between the urgency of peace and the risks of premature agreement. Ukraine stands at a crossroads, with its president navigating pressure from global powers while carrying the expectations of a people who endure the war every day. The images from Okhtyrka fade slowly, replaced by the memory of Zelensky's words, repeated across capitals. Peace must be real, peace must be dignified, and peace must be built with guarantees that hold firm long after the guns fall silent.